Hi, I'm DuEwa Frazier, and you're listening to episode 49 of Nerdacity podcast. Today, my guest is Ellen Hagan. Ellen is a writer, performer, and educator. Her books include Don't Call Me a Hurricane, Blooming Fiascos, Hemisphere, Crowned, Watch Us Rise, co-written with Renee Watson, and Reckless Glorious Girl. Ellen's work can be found in ESPN Magazine, She Walks in Beauty, and Southern Sin. She received a New York Foundation for the Arts Fellowship in Poetry in 2020 and has also received grants from the Northern Manhattan Arts Alliance and from the Kentucky Foundation for Women. Visit Ellen's website at ellenhagan.com. I hope you enjoy this episode. Greetings, Ellen. Greetings, Ellen.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's so wonderful to be here with you. It's so great to hear your voice.
Oh, thank you. It's so great to hear your voice. And, thanks for joining me on Nerdacity podcast. Ellen, I feel like we go way back creatively, and I'm so proud of you, so proud of everything that you've been doing. And you just continue to contribute in the worlds of, creative writing, women's arts, education, poetry, writing for young people. How has this been for you in recent years, your writing life?
Yeah, it's so funny. I feel the same way about you, DuEwa. I feel like with Check the Rhyme, it felt like the beginning of everything. And so your career, even following what you have been doing and watching your beautiful success, it feels like has been a wonderful energy over the last couple of decades. I've been in New York City for 20
Wow,
plus years
that's
now.
right.
Yeah. And
Well,
so
thank you
it
so much.
feels,
I didn't expect
yeah.
for you to say that. I wasn't gonna allude to that, but I I
No,
appreciate
but
it.
I mean, I'll say just for one other moment, we Check the Rhyme. You did so much incredible promotion with that book, and I felt like we also traveled. We went to San Francisco. I was just
Hmm.
talking to my partner David about this, and we were talking about the beginning of what felt like that moment I think it was Berkeley, California.
Hmm.
It felt like the beginning of something. I think
Yeah.
there were several moments for me, and then with collectives of women who were doing
Hmm.
the same. That's what I mean about that sort of collective
Wow.
community energy.
Hmm.
I mean, yeah, that was, and the people in the book are so amazing.
Oh,
So
I
just,
know. Just some of
you
the
know,
dopest poets and artists around. It's amazing to look at all the things that many of you have done, are doing, continue to do. And it's sort of like, hey, we were part of this cohort, right?
yes,
And, we came together to do this thing and do something really meaningful. And then everyone has had their own journey, and certainly was a part of my journey, just as showing me, hey, I can keep going. I can, do this work, and I can promote the work of other artists and poets, and I can still be an artist myself. And that's
yes.
what that time period showed me. So I totally appreciate your memory and your reflection on that. Thank you so much.
Yes. And well, I think there's something about my beginning in New York City. Well, my beginning as an artist, when I started to think of myself as an artist, was very much rooted in other artists who were showing me the way, the path. I
Mm.
think about somebody like Kelly Norman Ellis, Crystal
Oh,
Wilkinson,
yes.
people who were guides for me and were
Mm.
very much about what you were doing with Check the Rhyme, which was, let's collaborate, let's bring community together, let's
Hmm.
rise up together. What are we
Yep.
all doing
Right.
collectively? So I,
Mm.
I I very much think of those core moments of my career as being very much centered around community. So it was that moment of so many people teaching me, if I open the door, everybody's coming with me. We're all going in the
Mm.
door together. We're
There we
all going
go.
to be sharing our work and open mic, and everybody's welcome. So that's what I feel so clearly about now in my career, that I know that's what I'm rooted in. I know it's about community, it's about
Mm-hmm.
gathering, it's about showing the way for young people now that I'm an older person. It's
Yeah.
all of those
Mm.
sort of steps that I feel more confident about. I
Sure.
feel like, okay, I've hit and still learning, of course, but
Mm-hmm.
feeling a little bit more that I understand my place as an artist, and I understand what I want to do, where I want to go with the art making.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
wonderful, Ellen. And you've certainly carved out a place for yourself, and you've utilized every resource and platform that has been in your sphere, because you are an award-winning, fellowship-winning poet. You've received the 2020 New York Foundation for the Arts Fellowship in Poetry, a 2013 NOMA Creative Arts Grant, and received grants from the Kentucky Foundation for Women and the Kentucky Governor's School for the Arts. So you have been on fire, and I just want to congratulate you for that. How has that been in terms of thinking about support for an artist's work? I mean, we talk about community. We certainly have our community and fellow women artists who've supported us, but what has it also been like to actually receive, the validation and support in the financial way and in the way of, artist residencies and things like that for your work?
Yes, I think that is transformative. I think anywhere that your art can make can financially support you and can also fulfill you at the same time, can do both of those things, it feels very validating. I think when I received the NIFA, it felt so incredible because it was also other peers recognizing my work. So it felt like, oh, I'm doing this work alongside people that I very much admire, and I want to be doing what they're doing. So I'm trying to study. I'm trying to look at what these people that I so look up to and admire, what are they doing? How do I do that too? And so when an award like that happens, or when a residency, something like that, it feels like the collective is surrounding you, and it feel and again, I say that about the financial part of it, or an award that can can help you to move forward, can help you to not. I always think of artists as, you want to make the art, but you also want to get paid as an artist. You want to have
Mm-hmm.
a successful and full life. I
Yes.
talk to students, I talk
So
to students
true.
about
Who
that.
wants to be a
Yeah,
starving artist? No,
nobody wants to be
nobody.
really struggling. Yeah. And and that is real. I have so many students that either have families that don't want them to go into the arts, or are nervous about them supporting themselves in the arts. And the more we talk about, hey, the art can feed you in many ways. And so it's okay to talk about money. It's okay to talk about what the balance of making
Hmm.
art, and also funding yourself, and then maybe
Yeah.
funding someone else too. And so I think about those kind of awards as moments of like taking a breath. Oh, somebody sees me. Oh, somebody's recognizing this
Someone's,
work.
wow. Mm.
Yeah. Yeah, so I love it. I feel like I am still, there's many things I submit to, many things I don't get, some
Yeah.
things I do. And so I feel like that part makes you, sort of humble and relentless. I feel like I'm constantly, my relationship to rejection is different than it was in the past too. I sort of go, okay, I'm disappointed. Okay, I didn't get that. Let me
Right.
see what else
Let
is
me just
next.
move on.
Yeah, let me try to move on. Let me try. It's not always easy. I don't always move on that quickly. But I guess I'm more, I'm tougher than I was in the
Mm.
past. I feel like a little bit more seasoned in that
Hmm.
way. Um, so yes. It's
Oh, I
been
appreciate that.
great.
And
Yeah.
then, can you talk about, you have quite a connection to Kentucky. You're a member of the Afralash Poets, Conjure Women. You're a co-founder of the Girl Story Collective. You've, as mentioned a few minutes ago, received grants from Kentucky Foundation for Women and Kentucky Governor's School for the Arts. Being a New Yorker who's also from Kentucky, what is that like in terms of your artistic journey and how you're able to kind of keep those connections going with the Kentucky arts community?
Kentucky is so embedded in everything I do. I often talk about the Governor's School for the Arts, which is where I went when I was 17. That's where I had Kelly Norman Ellis was one of my teachers. Crystal Wilkinson was a guest artist at that
Wow.
time. Yes, I
Okay.
was 17,
All
like
these
in a class.
amazing women, poets and
Yes,
scholars. Yeah.
yes. Frank X. Walker was a teacher of mine. So they were all Nikki Finney.
Mm,
When you think about Kentucky legacy, writers who have such deep legacy in the
mm-hmm.
state, and so they were so in one of that very transform, that time where you are really transforming. I felt like they taught me everything that I've used, moving forward. And so I say that when I went to governor's school, I think Kelly talked so much about writing about your identity, writing about where you come from,
Mm,
owning where you come from. It was okay to be country. I remember this so specifically. She said, "How many of you call your grandma grandma?" And one or two people raised their hand, and other people said many other things: mama, mima,
mm,
abuela. And she said, you have to own your language. You have to own your anything that makes you feel like, I don't want to share that. I don't know. I'm going to
right.
be different. I'm going to. It was this constant saying, it's okay to be who you are. It's okay to write who you are. It's okay. People have these ideas about Kentucky, but you all are going to write yourself into existence. And I think
Mm,
that's what changed everything for me. And I feel like I try to say this more as the more I speak to young people too, that I grew up in Bardstown, Kentucky. It was a small town, about 10,000 people when I was there. My high school, I graduated with 84 people. My dad is white, Irish, has a background in Irish, Scottish, and my mom
mm-hmm.
is Italian and Assyrian. So
Mm,
Assyrian, I think of myself, I know often I show up in the room and present as white, but I think of myself as mixed race. And so
sure.
when I when that moment was opened in that classroom in Kentucky, when they said it's okay, but I remember my mom would talk about, you have a strong Middle Eastern nose, and that's where you get it from your grandfather. And
Mm,
thinking about writing about my identity in Kentucky, not always talking about my identity, not always understanding what my identity was, thinking about I I started the seed to start to figure out who I was
mm,
started in that classroom at 17 years old. Now, I didn't figure I'm still figuring it out. I'm still
sure.
thinking a lot about race and ethnicity and color. I'm still grappling with those things, but it started in Kentucky. And so when I think about Kentucky and I think about the land, and I think about having this diverse group of people who exist in Kentucky and debunking the stereotypes people have
Mm-hmm.
about Kentucky. And that's always feels like forever work, that I will always go back to Kentucky. I will always be in Kentucky. My family's there, my partner's family's there.
Mm-hmm.
Our roots are deep in Kentucky. So I feel like just because I'm not there all the time, it doesn't mean I'm not dreaming of it or thinking of it or
Sure.
being shaped by it. And
Mm.
that's so that was a long winding story to get to the fact that Kentucky just shaped everything all of who I am as an
Mm.
artist.
I love
Yeah.
that. And thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that. It's so important when we think about, especially now, Ellen, there's so much discussion for children in education, in higher ed, about diversity, equity, and inclusion, about identity, about color consciousness, and cultural heritage, and and cultural duality, and all these different things. And certainly that you reflect on that for yourself. I think as an educator, I would think that that would even make it so much more important or so much more impactful that you're working with youth. And you know that our youth grapple with a lot of those questions and thoughts about identity. And okay, my one parent is this and my other parent is this. What does that make
Yes.
me? And how do I might look a certain way. Other people are assigning labels to you, but they don't really know. And you cannot just look at a person and say, oh, this is what you are, even though we've been doing this in society for so long. That's really harmful and it's
Right.
dangerous. And I think it's so important, as you mentioned, just to even be able to explore that in your writing, in your art. Do you find that you explore identity and those kinds of things in your
I
writing?
Yes, I'm doing it more and more. I mean, I think I've been doing it for, even if my first book of poetry, Crowned, I'm absolutely was doing it a lot in Crowned, and that was, I think it came out in 2010, and it really was also shaped by, uh, I came to New York and started work with Community Word Project, which is an incredible arts and ed
Oh
organization.
yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and working with another teaching artist, Lisa Ascalon, who is an incredible poet and teacher. I learned a great deal from her, and we worked at this School of the Future, and we ended up with another collective of young girls in high school who were young women in high school. We started what was called the Girl Story Collective, and we performed together. And we performed at the Nuyorican. We were
Oh,
nominated at Adelphi University as
oh, I
Vagina
love
Warriors. Like
that.
we did a lot of performing, and we did a lot of we had so many conversations about identity at that time. So it
Mm-hmm.
was like a slow beginning. I think it's work I now continuously do. DreamYard is an anti-racist arts and social justice based organization. We do a lot of work on ourselves. We have a program called our learning community that our administrative staff goes through. We talk about what it means to be an anti-racist organization, what it means to do this work. And then I think about, so I'm trying to think, I'm thinking of it as doing my own personal work, and
Mm-hmm.
then figuring out how do I do that work with my characters on the page. So
Mm.
I have had characters who are the characters in the last YA books have been white, but they're also in communities that are populated with young people of color, young people
Mm-hmm.
who have different, who identify in different ways, um, have different gender identities, have different
Sure.
sexualities. So I feel like I'm trying to populate a world that exists for me, that
Mm-hmm.
exists for my children, that exists in the classrooms that I'm in. So I feel like I am figuring out how do I write about myself, but I'm also trying to figure out how do I write about complex, nuanced characters who are real and
Mm-hmm.
who populate my world and the world I want for my children, the world that exists for them. I was
Sure.
thinking of this one book, and there's so many books, but a book I've come back to, and my children, my husband's Filipino American, and our children also identify as mixed race. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a book that Tiffany Jewell has called "This Book is Anti-Racist," and there's a journal that goes with it,
Mm.
and it's been a beautiful resource as we are thinking about our personal identities. And then I think the more you know yourself, the stronger your art is. It feels like, okay, I'm figuring out who I am. What do I want to say? What's my story? What is my energy going into the next project? So I
Sure.
think those things truly have fed each other. Yes, yeah.
Oh, I
Mhm.
love that. Thank you for that. And
Mhm.
Ellen, you've been widely published in terms of your poems and essays. They have featured in ESPNW, Creative Nonfiction, Underwired Magazine, She Walks in Beauty, edited by Caroline Kennedy. I want to say, correct me if I'm wrong, Huizache?
Yes, Rizache, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Small Batch and Southern Sin. How have you been able to, especially through the pandemic? We had the pandemic that was, primarily everyone was on lockdown. For some artists, that was excellent. For other artists, it was like, oh, I just want to get out and get into the world so I can have inspiration to write. So, in terms of the recent years of being a writer, how had you been able to still focus on crafting those poems and essays while there was so much going on in the world?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is having a community around me. So I think it was 2016. I was invited into a beautiful circle of women that was founded by Cheryl Boyce Taylor, who is such a mentor and a guide
Oh,
for my own
yes.
writing.
Oh, I love
Amazing.
Cheryl. Uh-huh.
Cheryl is so incredible. And she has a group called Elma's Heart Circle. And they, from 2016, we wrote together every April for National Poetry Month, but then there were years where we wrote in June and we wrote in
Mm,
September, or we wrote, so we were always in this online community. It has slightly changed over the years, but we
sure.
are a collective that is multi-generational, is from very diverse backgrounds, and it has been an anchor for me. In It's somewhere to continue. Everyone is expecting a poem every day, everyone's expecting some comments, everyone's expecting some feedback. That constant, though, that continuous, hey, how are you, what's going on in your work, how are you doing, what are you creating, that part has been so essential to me continuing to create. And then I would just give a shout out to Renee Watson, who has continued to be, also is a close friend of mine, but a collaborator. And
Mm,
so we often check in with each other. Hey, what are you writing? What are you working on? What are you creating? Hey, I need to show you this. Can you read that? That is also, it's an let's be accountable to each other.
sure.
Let's share work. Let's see what you're creating. How's my work in conversation with yours? And so I do think if you can find your cohort of people, I think of Aracelis Girmay, who I met, right when I moved to New York City,
Oh, yeah. Wonderful
and
poet. Hmm.
incredible poet, and who is again a close friend who I go, hey, can you look at this? What do you think about this? So
Mm,
I feel like, and it's friends who also say, what are you working on? Have you been doing anything? Have you been writing? Are you following what you said you wanted to do?
sure.
Um,
Hmm.
I had also, this is, I feel like this, Jamie Attenberg. I don't know if I feel like I talk about Jamie Attenberg a lot. I don't know Jamie Attenberg, but she's a novelist and she wrote a memoir, and she started the Thousand Words of Summer. And so
Mm,
I have a friend and collaborator, Andy Powell at DreamYard, and
hmm.
he said, I'm doing this, a Thousand Words of Summer. Should we do it? And so it's like 2 weeks. You write 1,000 words a day, and it's like getting the editor out of your head. And so
Mm,
I have a project I'm working on. I'm trying to work on this adult novel. And I just said, you know what? I'm just going to write 1,000 words. And I did it through the pandemic. I wasn't writing 1,000 words a day, but I was journaling a lot.
hmm.
I think I'm never without writing. And so even if it's writing on my phone, if it's writing on it, I do keep dozens of journals. Or if it's saying more seriously, I need to write 1,000 words because I know this book needs to fit. I need to get a draft of it. That kind of process of, I don't have to be, I'm not a perfectionist. In fact, I probably work too quick. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm doing two things too fast.
All
But
right, that's it. I'm
I
done.
that's it, I'm done. But I want the words on the page. I like producing. I like storytelling, and I like having someone go, "Hey, I'm waiting for this story. So finish it so that I can look at it, give me feedback." Then of course, then you got to really work at the craft and the editor and
Sure.
all of that. But I think that's how I've done it. It's like gaming my mind of just get
Hmm.
down, sit down, write for 25 minutes. It's like tricking myself to get the
Sure.
words on the page. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Mm.
appreciate you mentioning that too, because I think there are people, that may listen to the podcast, writers, emerging writers, and some people, they wonder, how do you begin? Or if you've had a lull in your writing, what's the best practice to kind of get back? So I appreciate you talking about the 1,000 words and, write for 25 minutes and then you can get up. Like, it's
Yes.
totally that, kind of like playing that game with yourself.
Right. And
Um,
I did want to say the other thing that I feel like I have two, they're not that young anymore. I have a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old
oh,
daughters. And there was a moment when they were small where I wasn't reading as much. When they were first born, those first
hmm.
couple of years, I was reading, but it was here and there. And I will say, one of the best things for me as a writer, I ended up joining, a friend of mine invited me to a book club, a small book club. There was like three moms in the neighborhood, and really changed the way it kind of put a deadline on, hey, I need to read this book in the month. I need to finish this. And something about my reading changed too, my focus and my reading. And so I'm continuously reading everything I can. I'm reading
Mm.
graphic novels. I'm reading literary fiction, YA, poetry. I have a very clear idea of what do I love? What do I love to read? And
Sure.
there's often books that I'm reading and I'm going, I want to do this. I cannot believe this person did
I
this
know,
and
it's like,
I
oh
want to
my
do
God,
it.
this is exactly what I wanted to do.
Yes. How did
Look,
they do that?
when Esperanza Spa, I want to say Esperanza, what's her name? Poet X.
Um,
What's her last name?
oh,
Esperanza.
the poet ex Elizabeth
No,
Acevedo, or
Elizabeth Acevedo. Why was I saying
yes,
Esperanza? That's a character in another book. When
yes,
that book
yes,
came out, I was like, OMG, she wrote the Poet X. And I always wanted to write that middle grade or
yes.
YA book about a young, a girl, a teen poet. And I was like, she wrote it. She wrote the book,
Wrote
and
it.
it's so awesome because a lot of times I feel like, these ideas are floating in the universe and they're up for grabs on who's going to take it and be, serious about it.
That's right. That's
So I
right.
totally understand what you're saying. If it kind of sometimes, not all the time, but it kind of sometimes seems like if you don't run with your idea, you're gonna see it somewhere else. Do you feel that way at times?
I absolutely do. I really do. And I don't want to say, because I also feel like people have different processes. I
Mm-hmm.
know some people don't want to write a ton of books. Some people want to write one, two, three books, and they want to, their process is is different than mine.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I think whatever way you approach the art, it has to work for you. You might
Mm-hmm.
be somebody who, I'm going to take my time with this. I don't want to write 1,000 words a day. I want to go much slower in my process.
Right.
I want to
Right.
take my time. I have never been like that. I want to, I remember I always tell this story. When I was in grad school, I was very young. I went to grad school right after undergrad. I was 22,
Mm-hmm.
23, and I was like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, the next thing that happens, I'm going to hit big. This is going to happen. I'm going to be 30 under 30. And
Oh.
then I was like 40 under 40. I'll be on whatever list. And now I'm 40. I'm going to be 45 this year. Now I'm like, I don't care what list I get on. I just want to be making art for the rest of the
There you
time
go.
that I'm
Yeah.
in the world. And
Because if
so,
mhm.
yeah, go, no, keep going,
I
go
was
ahead.
just gonna say, because if you think about just the greatest writers ever, like a Toni Morrison or a James
Yes,
Baldwin, or just some of the great, they hit. I mean, yes, they were on a journey, but a lot of their greatest works certainly was after 40, after 50, even after 60.
yes,
Alice Walker and people like that. It's like it I think it can remind us that it's not an age so much as maybe it's that whole, like, when you say talk about the process of wine aging, like the whole it
right.
gets better with time.
Yes, yes.
So
And it goes back to your question of, do you want, so I am competing with myself. I'm like,
mm,
okay, here's my ideas. Here's what I want to tell. I need to figure out a way to tell this. Otherwise, you're right. Someone else is going to tell the story. Someone else is going to have something that's so similar they don't want to publish that.
yeah.
So you've got to figure out, what is the core, what stories do you want to tell, what
Hmm.
matters to you, and then how you want to tell them. I know this is, I say this to students a lot too. I'm writing books, but I'm also, if you're somebody who's a performer, maybe you have a solo show that comes out as part of your book, or maybe you have a visual
Hmm.
art showcase, or you're someone who your book is really a TV show. So you got to write the book first before, I think there's something out there that feels like you can see, Abbott Elementary, when Quinta Brunson, I was like, this show is brilliant. It's about school. We've been in school. I just see it too. And I go,
Mm.
oh, I love that they're creating this. And there's space for other people to create things too.
Yes.
If I kind of go, the world is expansive. And there could be dozens of shows about schools and about
That is
education.
so
There,
true. I
yeah,
appreciate you saying that because I'm sure there are folks going, oh my God, they did Abbott Elementary. I really was thinking about writing something about an elementary,
exactly.
and then it makes them feel like, okay, can't do that now.
Right. Yes, you can do it. I think there's so many stories, there's so many retellings and new tellings and new, new angles on it. I think if you trust your voice too, if you trust, okay, let me just follow this voice, let me tell this story, let me practice. Let me get to the page, or let me get to the theater, let me get to and I also want to stress again, you've got to have your people who
Mm,
tell you, who care about you enough to say, this is really working and this is not. Hey, I
okay.
want you to go out there with your best work. So maybe go back to this section. You want people that you trust enough to give you honest feedback too.
That's
When
so
you want it,
true.
you might need a friend who's like, I just need all love on this round of feedback. I need all the good energy. Then I can
Right. I
take the
just no criticism. I can't take it
right.
today. Right.
Right.
um, well, that's great, Ellen. And just thinking about all of your work. You mentioned Renee Watson, your good friend and collaborator. So you collaborated with Renee on Watch Us Rise, a YA collaboration. Your books also include Crowned, Hemisphere, Blooming Fiascos, Reckless Glorious Girl, and more recently, Don't Call Me a Hurricane. And of course, you also have a forthcoming work that is scheduled for September 2023 called All That Shines. Please tell us about your recent work and how you kind of pivoted from poetry, from essays, into writing for middle grade and young adult readers.
Sure. Yeah, I think it feels very seamless too. Anyone who has, I hope, that has read my poetry would see that, and I would shout out Elizabeth Acevedo again. I remember reading the Poet X, and I had read a little bit of, I'd read a few other novels in verse, but I remember reading that one and thinking, oh, this is the different. I see how novels in verse are happening. I see this sort of this process. And so when I after Watch Us Rise, which has poems in it, but it's not a novel in verse,
Mm-hmm.
I reached out to my editor at Bloomsbury, Sarah Shumway-Lu, who was a great collaborator in terms of saying, "Hey, you have some poetry. Are you thinking about a novel in verse? Is there, so the last Reckless Glorious Girl and Don't Call Me a Hurricane are both novels in verse, and so they're told in poems, and the poems sometimes are in conversation with each other. They sometimes stand alone on the page." And they're very much. I was new at telling novels in verse. I thought I know how to tell a story. I know how to write a poem, or I'm practiced in it. I have some good experience with it.
Mm-hmm.
But thinking about following a timeline was new for me, and
Sure.
I loved the experience. Reckless Glorious Girl is very much a coming of age, a 12-year-old girl in small town. She lives in Bardstown, Kentucky, figuring out who she is, how to own her identity, show up in the world. I feel like those are themes that happen often in my books. How to love yourself, I guess how to love who you are and how to present your best self.
Mm.
And Don't Call Me a Hurricane was actually written about a Jersey Shore. My family grew up. All summers growing up, we spent time in Long Beach Island, New Jersey. So it's centered in Long Beach Island, New Jersey. It is about a family recovering from a hurricane,
Mm.
loosely based on Hurricane Sandy, but it's not mentioned as Hurricane Sandy, but it's absolutely a family who's recovering from it, and a group of young climate activists who are grappling with some tourists who are coming in and trying to some building that's happening that is destroying the island. So it's about climate change, it's about young activists, it's about friendship. There's a love story. I try to do many things in my YA because I know that young people, like all of us who are older as well, are doing many and living through many things at once.
Sure.
The world is falling apart and we're falling in love. Things are, there's a
I love
disaster
that. Wait,
and there's a
Ellen,
first
say that
kiss,
again. Say
What?
that again. The world is falling apart.
The the world is falling apart and we're falling in love. Was that it? I don't know, something
Yes.
like that.
Oh, I
You
love
know,
that.
those things are true at the same time. And so
Hmm.
I think I, I think young people want to know how they want to see other people dealing with that too. I think I know that when I was 17, I wanted to read stories about things. I cared a lot about social justice issues. I
Mm-hmm.
was very outspoken, probably a little bit obnoxiously so. I had a lot to say, but I was also had crushes all the time, and I had really amazing friends that I grew up with. I did a
Mm-hmm.
bunch of things. I was a cheerleader. I was in the theater. I was trying to harness this big life, and
Mm.
so I think that's what my characters are doing in the books. They're figuring out how to exist in the world. And so there's hits and misses, they're not perfect at it, but I'm trying to show young people who are struggling sometimes, and who get it right and who don't, who sometimes get it right and sometimes get it wrong,
Mm.
and what happens through that. Yeah.
Certainly. Wow, that's so wonderful. And I appreciate you mentioning, you know, we people sometimes forget, or maybe I shouldn't say people, as you mentioned, you've lived a life. Now you're a not an emerging poet or writer. You can look back on all your work, but you can also see your own growing up. And you mentioned being a part of the collective for Girl Story, and working with these amazing women, and you have your own girl stories, your own
Right.
girlhood stories, right? Like you mentioned,
Yeah.
falling in love and those kind of things. And I really appreciate that, because we can use those as points of jumping off points, I would think, for our writing. Would you say?
Totally. Everything, and part of, for me too, my work as an educator, and because I get the chance to work with young people, with middle school, high school, I learn so much from them too. I am always figuring out how much we are still connected, how much I still see young people who are dealing with all of those intense emotions too. They're full of joy, and there's sorrow, and there's anger, and there's angst, and there's all of those emotions are heightened at that age. And so
Mm-hmm.
yes, I'm trying to figure out, and of course, as I have my own kids, I want them to see other stories of powerful but also questioning young people. I want them to see that people don't do things perfectly, that they make
Sure.
mistakes, that they're grappling through it, that they're struggling and they're figuring it out. Um, so yeah, I think everything informs everything for me. I'm always figuring out, how do I watch the world? How am I paying attention to the stories that need to get told, the things that have driven me in both work and community? What are those things, and how do I connect with people with those things too?
Sure. Oh,
Yeah.
that's amazing. Thank you for that, Ellen. And so
Yeah.
now, we've talked a number about a number of your wonderful works, your books, your poems, and your essays. And I'd love for you to share any number of your poems with us, or an excerpt from your prose. The audience would really love to hear it.
Yes. So I'm going to read from Don't Call Me a Hurricane. And this is in the beginning of the book. It's Eliza is our main character, and she is figuring out how to move forward. She's dealing with some post-traumatic stress. She is in therapy for it. She's figuring out um, how to move forward. There was that their family has struggled with um, several things that have been sort of the after effects of the storm, and so she's writing a little bit about that here. And I'll read three of the poems, and they're next to each other. So this is from Don't Call Me a Hurricane. My father used to call me a hurricane. Wild and unruly, rowdy and messy, fast and reckless, unmoving and impulsive, headstrong and willful, unexpected and quick, electric and fleeting, floating and flying, scrappy and breakneck. All the time, moving and flowing and hurried and flashing and free, free, free. Now, we are careful not to compare anything to a hurricane, because we know how dangerous and destructive it can be. We know its toll, from the US to the Caribbean to China to Canada to Cuba, and on and on. wrecking lives and families across the globe. We know its winds and rains, floods and rising waters. We know the damage and the loss. We know the trauma and the pain and the doubled over and the weeping and my mother holding on to us to save us from the storm. How the shape of our lives changed forever. We know the cost. How is it possible to love something so much, but still be terrified of it? Hold it close, but worry it could sink you. Want you to live, want to live beside it, but scared it could end you. These questions stay lodged inside me. Carry them with me all along the way. My therapist is always asking me to analyze my relationship to water, to the ocean, always asking how it shapes me, changes me, pushes and pulls me, brings me back to myself. And every time I think about my people, my family and friends, and how all of us are linked to water, to swimming, to treading, to hoping, to breathing, to staying above, to surviving. And I'll pause there.
Wow. Mm.
Thank you. And
What a
so
strong voice.
I would say about that book too, that's important to note that it is told in flashbacks as well. So there are 4 or 5 sections that are told from the family living through the hurricane. So there's a moment that Eliza's brother is there. There's several issues that the family goes through. And so those are told in those flashbacks. So I didn't read from the flashbacks then, but you're with the family during the hurricane. And so it's very much about living on a barrier island. It's very much about what do these young activists do to figure out how to maintain their island home, and what are the risks and what are the sacrifices that they have to make. Yeah.
Truly. It's wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it feels, and I was going to say that I have also loved, I've recorded a couple of Don't Call Me a Hurricane and Reckless Glorious Girl, been able to record the audiobook, and it has been a joy to feel like it is performance poetry too, in being able to just get the words up, and in the body, it goes back to check the rhyme, this idea of being on stage or sharing it with a larger audience. It feels like a lot of ways to connect with either readers or people who want to listen to books, or people who want to, however they want to engage with the book. That feels special.
Truly. That's wonderful. And do you think that, Ellen, that you'll be able to envision a sequel if you haven't already?
I don't know about a sequel to this. I feel like I will say I am very, part of writing that book was me grappling with my own anxiety around climate change. And so I think often about end of the world scenarios. I think a lot about, what are those things that people do to survive. I think about that often, of what are the things, what do we have to do to be to gather together? What are the things we have to do? What are the things that matter most? The family and friends. If things go bad, what do we hold on to? What do we cling to? I think about that a lot. So I don't know that I say that because there's these moments of them really struggling and grappling with what's happening to our changing world. And so I I I think that sometimes my creative work is figuring out the way out of something. And I don't know.
Sure.
So I think I will revisit it in that way. I think when I'm grappling with my own fears around the climate, or around issues in the world, that I think, what are the things I care deepest about. And so I don't know if that will show up. Some of those themes again will show up in the work.
Sure.
But I imagine they might.
Oh, that's awesome. And Ellen, did you have any other poems or excerpts that you might want to share?
I do. Sure. I can share 2 small from All That Shines.
Yeah.
This is, sure. I will. There's 2 poems. I just pulled these up. So All That Shines is slightly, it's set in Lexington, Kentucky, in horse country. Lexington is big horse farms. It's a city, but it feels like a big town. It's where I went to college, the University of Kentucky, and it's about a young girl whose family has incredible wealth, and within the first few pages of the book, the family loses that. The father, I'm not giving anything away because it happens immediately. The father is arrested, and her and her mother have to go and live in a part of town that the family owns, an apartment building, but it's a rundown part of town that they have let go, that they have not taken care of. They haven't fixed it up. And so the book is really about Chloe Brooks is the main character. It's about her figuring out who she is without all the excess, without all the stuff. So it's very much a book about class. And it's very much a book about, again, friendship. There's music. There's some bluegrass music involved. There's a lot of summer nights of stretched out before her, figuring out who is she without these trappings that she felt like made her who she was. And so I feel like it's a soul searching book. And there's also, of course, there's a love story in here as well, which I think is central to this book too. How does she love herself? And maybe she falls in love while she's figuring out how to love herself. So these are our two poems back to back.
Okay.
All of a sudden, my life is unraveling, coming apart at the seams, a thread that gets pulled and then keeps running and running along with no end in sight, just unspooling right before my eyes. 1 week ago, my family was one of the wealthiest ones in the bluegrass, if not the country. Today, we are left with nothing. One rogue credit card that won't last, and one apartment complex that is crumbling around us. Just enough to keep us afloat, along with everyone here. It's true. Money gave me the feeling of being the only one. Most special, the prize, the make it to the top girl, whatever you want girl. So when I look in the mirror and do not see that same girl, I do not know what to think, how to act, who to be, what I need, what's next, how to stay moving at all. And I miss everything. The way I never had to ask for anything I wanted. It just arrived. I dreamed it and it was there. I miss my horses, all of them, boarded now and being ridden by girls who are not me, at stables that are not ours. I miss the wind washing over me and the speed over the hills. I miss our porch and pool, my friends hanging out with no worry about time or obligations. Declan, Lily, all the kids who'd hang forever at our place. Miss making out in the back seat and missing curfew because no one was ever up waiting, because my mom and dad had their own lives without me, had their businesses and were always so busy they didn't notice my wild or out of control. I miss being out of control. Now there is quiet, and I am not at all used to silence. So I am left alone with my thoughts, and that feels terrifying. I'll pause there.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
I am excited to start reading. You know, when it's a new book, you feel like, oh, okay, which poem? What do I share? How much do I tell?
Because the other ones that you don't share might feel some kind of way. So
right. You
know.
gotta figure out how do I share this in the world? What does it look like? So it's that is always, I feel like, a very nerve-wracking time when the book is in advanced reader copies and it's about to go out in the world and you're about to share it. That's always feels very vulnerable, like
yeah,
just a little
totally
bit more vulnerable. Yeah. So yeah. Oh.
And so, Ellen, you know, I appreciate the reading. It's so beautiful. I feel like there's so much energy in your voice and so much passion in the work that you've put out in the world, your art, your poetry, and it just translates through all of your work with young people, your work with other writers. Can you discuss what you're really excited about that's coming up? Obviously, All That Shines, it's coming in fall of 2023. But is there anything else you can share with us that may be in the works or something that you might be thinking about in terms of a really great collaboration?
Yes, I do. This feels like it's I feel like I'm just in the beginning of trying to figure out how All That Shines happens and how to sort of to share that. And I'm currently writing a little bit with my partner David Flores. We have loved the process of writing together and doing a little bit of back and forth. And so collaborating with him, he's a photographer and a filmmaker, but also such a beautiful writer. So we have been going back and forth a little bit and writing with each other and writing some notes. You know, we fell in love while he was still living in Kentucky. Had moved here, and so our love story happened in letters. We talked on the phone. It was the very old school beginning to our
Mm-hmm.
relationship.
Oh, wow.
And so this sort of process of us writing together, writing to each other, feels like it is brimming with some possibilities. So I'm very excited about the work I'm doing with David. And then I'm very much thinking about how do we share, especially in the YA and the poetry world, how do we share our work with young people? So we're actively thinking at DreamYard how to build we have an open mic. We had an open mic series for many years, and with the pandemic, it quieted down a little bit. So we're also thinking about how do we make DreamYard, the DreamYard Art Project, the DreamYard Project right there in the Bronx, a space for open mics, a space for young adult authors to come through, a place where they can connect with the young people who are reading their books. So that's something we're hoping for the fall. And then I'm absolutely excited about taking All That Shines on the road. I'm hoping to go to some schools in Kentucky and hoping to be in conversation with young people both in Kentucky and then around the country. Yeah, I think it's reading and sharing the work with young people, doing writing workshops with them, that feels like it builds momentum. It feeds me as an educator, and also talking to librarians and classroom teachers about what they're doing, what they're reading, what they are sharing. That feels very exciting too. So I'm looking forward to all of those things.
Oh, that's so awesome. And Ellen, can you say again the publisher for your publisher for Don't Call Me a Hurricane and your publisher for All That Shines, as well as how we can pick up these wonderful books, especially when All That Shines comes out?
Yes. So Bloomsbury is the publisher for all of my young adult and middle grade books. And Northwestern University Press is the publisher for poetry. And I would suggest I feel like Independent Bookstore Day, I think, is coming up, maybe even this weekend. And I would say find your local bookstore, absolutely, and find the place that you feel like comfortable. When you walk in, they know what you like to read. They're holding stacks for you. Places that are in my neighborhood. Word Up is in Washington Heights. I live
Oh
uptown in the
yes,
Heights.
Word Up
Word
Books,
Up
yes.
is a phenomenal community-run bookstore.
Yeah.
Really incredible space. And then if you're in Kentucky, you would go to Carmichael's Books if you're around. They have a couple of different locations. They'd be a great spot. But any local. Or here's the other thing I always tell young people: the library. Go to the library, get your you can also do the e-reader in the library. Check
Mm-hmm.
it out on your phone. If you're somebody who writes, I have a student who reads all the time, and her library card is on fire. Like she's reading things too fast to get them at the she doesn't have time to go to the bookstore. She's reading them.
She's
So I
devouring
say,
the books.
that's right. Get to your library, get to your, that would be a great way to read the books as well.
So awesome. And Ellen, definitely we want to know where we can follow you and fan you and friend you on all of the socials. So yes, let's shout out your socials.
Yes, I am on Instagram and Twitter at Ellen Hagan. And I have not posted anything on TikTok yet, but I am going to. There's going to be some videos.
Yes.
So
Book
in the
talk.
future, that's
Yes.
right. I'm working on it. I'm getting there.
Okay.
And that's Ellen_Hagan. I'm on Facebook as Ellen Hagan, and my website is ellenhagan.com. And I will say I am also trying something new with All That Shines. We are doing a pre-order sale, and as I said, my partner David Flores is a photographer. We're doing the first 100 people that pre-order the book, which pre-order is a big deal. It shows the publisher that people are interested.
Yes.
It gives, a big emphasis. The first 100 people will get a photograph of Kentucky, a handcrafted, numbered photograph from Kentucky from photographer David Flores.
Oh, wow.
And you just have to, all the info is on social media. You could just send the receipt to DM me the receipt, and I will send you the postcard, and it will have a prompt from the book. So if you want a little piece of art, it's a little exchange to try to see how that might work.
Oh, I love that. And people love to receive something. You know what I mean? They love a good gift, giveaway, freebie, especially if it's really meaningful, as well as you've discussed Kentucky and your connection. So I think that would really be awesome.
Yes, I hope so. And Kentucky is beautiful. So the postcards will be that kind of like an artifact or a piece of art from this state that I think is often misunderstood. So I would love for people to go away with a little piece of Kentucky.
Of course. And I just want to mention, just in case anyone hears any sound that sounds a bit like typing, I was tweeting during this interview because I felt what Ellen Hagan was saying was so powerful and so positive. And so definitely check Ellen out on Twitter. I've been tagging you, Ellen, at Ellen Hagan. And also, of course, Nerdacity is on Twitter at NerdacityPod1. And so, Ellen, thank you so much for joining me here on Nerdacity Podcast. It's been a real treat because, hey, we are still celebrating National Poetry Month, and I'm so thankful that we got you in before the month ended.
I love it. And DuEwa, I say again, you have been a huge inspiration and changed so much for me for very early when I got to New York. So I'm so happy that we are still creating, collaborating. It feels very special to have this conversation with you in particular.
Thank you so much, Ellen. And And you were just listening to episode 49 of Nerdacity Podcast featuring writer Ellen Hagan. Visit her website at ellenhagan.com and be sure to follow Ellen on social media and check out her current books. I hope you'll follow Nerdacity on Instagram at Nerdacity Podcast. Tweet me about this and other episodes, as well as any book, culture, entertainment, or film news at NerdacityPod1 on Twitter. We also have a Facebook page, Nerdacity Podcast with DuEwa, and definitely visit my author, artist, and consulting website at DuEwaFrazier.com. Thanks so much for listening. Take care.